enough where you have that edge and be able to maximize an opportunity when it presents itself.
This goes completely to a different topic I had coming up is customer service seems to be going by the wayside. And as bettors growing up over the previous, years, a lot of these bookmaker player relationships are about relationships. You get to know each other, what you can get away with, what they want, what they don't want. And it's a two-way streak where it kind of works for each other. Are those times in our past for good?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think the way it's trending for the majority of the space, that could be something of a bygone era. And the reason I say that is because some of these books don't even have their own trading floors. I mean, they're working with third-party solutions, so they don't know what their numbers are. They don't necessarily know what the liability is. They can't move aggressively enough. Whereas that was kind of the world that I was brought into, that if I wanted to invite some of the sharper bettors that were there, if I could limit them, that's my information. The reality of it is I never had enough time to cover every single market that was out there. So if I had Ron come in and I knew he was great in the MAC and he was going to bet games on Wednesday, those things were going to move. I could shade a price accordingly and welcome in potential scalpers or anybody else that was looking for an arb the other way. And for other bettors that had different sports, as long as you could catalog those bettors, you were going to be in a good spot and you could put your best foot forward. And I think that's what some books are doing. Matt mentioned some of it. And when you have the staff that you trust, you're afforded that luxury a little bit more than some of the other books that may be out there that don't feel comfortable taking it. It becomes a fear factor relationship as much as anything else, when it really shouldn't be that case. I mean, I have a lot of the guys on town where if I go, hey, look, can I bet a little bit more? I know it'll go through on the app, but I don't want to take a shot at a futures price at 30 or 40 to 1 if you guys don't need any more action on it. More often than not, they're going to say yes, then they'll move the number thereafter. Whereas shame on me if I'm deciding I want to walk around and take shots. And forgive my language here, guys. I know it's probably PG-13. I don't want to shit where I eat. I mean, that's just not how this space should work. And I think, unfortunately, some of the new school guys don't view it that same way. So as a result, it poisons some of the waters for the way that guys that have been in the space for a lot longer operate, and kind of the things that I was taught behind the counter and lessons that have been drummed into my head by the sharp guys over the last 10 to 15 years.
Building
you guys are too young.
It benefited me tenfold. Whatever I had to do with these books, I benefited 10 times because they were grateful to have those working relationships. Go ahead, Ron, ask them about the Wheel of Death.
Well, I've heard you guys are too young. Just give me the Ivy League in front of the counter and leave me alone and let me bet what I want to bet. That was the bread and butter. Run, pass, punt. Just win the line of scrimmage. Wheel of Death. I love that
those
term
FCS,
that you mentioned.
Those FCS numbers are tougher and tougher. I mean, to try and be able to move anything that's not going to move 6 to 7 points. Ivy League basketball, though, that always had a fond place in my heart when it was the only league going on Friday nights, and I didn't have a damn thing to do when I was on curfew in college because we had bet check on the East Coast.
Oh, geez. Wheel of Death. I love that term that you mentioned in the podcast, and I know what that spinning wheel looks like. Educate the people who are going to listen and watch this. What's that Wheel of Death?
Yeah, it's the bane of every bettor's existence out there. And I think the other term that I've seen growing in popularity, what they call it, spooling now. I think that's the other one that they're putting out there. If with these books, because a lot of them aren't transparent with their limits, and again, there are some, so I don't want to cast too wide a net. You never know what you're going to get. I mean, you could bet one market on a Tuesday and get $200. You could bet one market on a Thursday, that same market, get $400. So it becomes a guessing game as much as anything else, instead of just, hey, look, here are your limits. Here's what you're going to bet. Give us 3 minutes. If we don't move the price, you can come in and bet it again the way it should be done. So live bettors see it a hell of a lot more than a lot of folks that are trying to move in pregame markets. But I actually had an experience earlier today where I watched that thing spin for about 4 minutes. I wasn't sure if my bet went through. I wasn't sure if I'd been geo-fenced. There's so many things that can go on with it. And it just drives you absolutely nuts, especially when you're trying to do 50 to 100 things on game day. And you have that sinking feeling where you think you got to bet in on a good price. You go back and look in the accounts and go, guess it didn't actually go through. And you want to point fingers at anybody other than yourself.
Well, I mentioned it before. I put in 2 bets. I get each for $100. I get $98 on one. and I went all the way down to $2 and they wouldn't even give me $2. So are you still, I know you're a original Six fan like I am. I'm originally from Detroit. You're a Blackhawks fan. I assume you haven't converted to the Golden Knights.
No. I grew up a Rangers fan. My old man's from New York. So that was my original Six allegiance. I remember 1994 like it was yesterday, being 12 years old, running around the house with my Mike Richter jersey on when they finally broke the 50-year Stanley Cup drought there. But unfortunately, Chris, I have to admit, I have become a little bit of a sellout. I was a season ticket holder when the Knights came here. And while I don't live and die with Golden Knights hockey, I find myself rooting for them a lot more than I probably should, even when they play my childhood team in the beloved Rangers.
Well, I had to wait 3 years longer for the Wings to win start winning their ways. So are you still betting the NHL? Are there any angles besides, I heard you say that you kind of lean under, which is a lot of what I do in NHL betting on the totals. And how do you handicap NHL? Are metrics a priority for you, or is it the feel of the game?
Yeah, I mean, you want a sweat in this day and age when you're betting the NHL. Bet a game under the total. See it as a 2-goal margin with 6 minutes to go and realize how many empty net opportunities am I going to have to dodge. That's the one point, Ron, where you talked about going on walks on Sundays. I'll watch the first 2.5 periods or 50 minutes of an NHL game. I refuse to watch the final 10 minutes because I don't think it does anything productive for my handicapping going forward, because it is the ultimate definition of late game variance. So I think that in and of itself has changed the way I handicap totals. And the NHL is a market that I've gotten into a lot later on. I mean, I kind of had a love-hate relationship with it. And it's over the last couple seasons I've tried to refine my process. I mean, I love looking at, a lot of the advanced stats that are out there. I think some people go, well, looking at expected goals models, they're all flawed. I think they show you a good snapshot of the direction where teams are going. We all know puck luck is a real thing. And in a one-game sample size, hey, look, anything can happen. It's a reason that more often than not, you don't find yourself laying massive prices in those games. But the thing, Chris, that I found to be helpful is kind of charting patterns for coaches and identifying where I'm going to get a backup goalie that's not necessarily built into the market, as you're seeing a lot of these starters rest more often than not. And that's where I almost feel a little bit dirty, because the way I've been raised, I'm not looking to move substantial sums in the NHL. So if I can move drips and drabs the night before, if it's a second leg of a back-to-back, I'm happy to try and take prices on, say, a Rangers game when I know they're going to sit Igor Shesterkin. I wait for, the markets to open up a little bit. And if the price is still there, I'll go in for a full position. But I think you have to be willing to move a little bit more the night before if you're trying to use goalie rotations and starting goalies as a integral element of identifying your edge, both on side and total.
Yeah, and then to add to it, I don't think the books are fans of people betting in the overnight lines at a decent price. So I generally actually avoid betting at that time.
It's a lot harder. And I mean, it's a couple of dollars here or there. I mean, I'm not trying to go, obviously, and plowing into games and absolutely destroying markets for that, for just those reasons. I mean, that'll be the first thing, that if they think I had, all the rotations, or I had the NHL's front office on speed dial, they'll go, you know what, we don't want your business. And if it cuts off a valuable out, trying to bet hockey that I need for other sports, it's definitely being foolish in the big picture.
I've been doing this for 40 plus years, but I'm always trying to learn new things and network with people. So when I hear something like you said about positive injury luck, I'm thinking, okay, I know that Team A, their offensive line played every single game, or Team B, they had tremendous secondary injuries, or all three running backs go down for Baltimore. So now I'm trying to think out loud, how do I quantify that? Can it be quantified? You mentioned positive injury luck. So how do you put that into play, whether it be season wins or any aspect of your handicapping?
So a little bit more difficult for season wins to try and build into the equation, because trying to forecast out how some of these teams will deal with it going forward is a challenge. Now, you can build in a little bit for turnovers, but we know turnovers aren't as predictive, even if they do typically regress for a lot of teams if they have a season where they're extremely fortunate with fumble luck, or they had a major outlier. Obviously, if you're a New York Giants fan, I don't think you want to build that in, because we know Daniel Jones is essentially Dave Craig out there in the pocket for the way he treats the football like a hand grenade. But as far as making some of those adjustments in season, I think this is where you can try and identify, a little bit of opportunity. The quarterback, hey, look, if Aaron Rodgers is out, that's reflected in the market. More often than not, you're not going to be able to steal something. But if a team may be playing a third string left tackle, books don't necessarily have to build that in for public perception. So it's trying to identify those nuances, talking to people that know the X's and O's a little bit better, and figuring out where a term that I know is the in vogue, word that's going around, especially now with football season. It's cluster luck in baseball, but it's cluster injuries in football, where a position group is absolutely decimated. I think that's where you can get a little bit of an edge that's not built into openers. And more often than not, it may not even show up in some of that closing line, right before kickoff on Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sportsbook transparency, will it ever come? Do you think the majors actually care in the least? Are they just laughing at the people that complain about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say it would come, but I don't think it benefits those parties that are in full control. I mean, we've seen some of the dialogue that's gone on with, injury reports and starting lineups and everything else. You'd love to say that all of the information was forward facing and that somewhere along the way, it was going to be made available for public consumption from the sportsbook side and the league standpoint. But for anybody who listened to the earnings reports for some of the biggest sportsbook operators this week, if that was any indication of the shill game going on, I think transparency may be something that we don't see for 15 to 20 years at best.
Yeah, earnings were through the roof. Ron, you have a question there?
Yeah, I guess it was back to the beginning. You talked about being on the counter and then going back, now being a bettor and so on. Do you think about those things when you see a line move? Do you think about how somebody set an opening line, if it's different than yours? Are your thought processes different because you were on that side of the counter when you're analyzing a line?
Yeah, it's definitely the case. I think when you look at the timing of a move, when it comes in, especially for football, that we know those numbers are on the board for, let's call it 6 to 7 days. What book the number is moving at first and foremost, why it might be moving there, if it's a little bit unorthodox, and a lot of the different combinations that can go on. Now, I think the nice part about it, when you continue to build relationships, you have a decent understanding of, where some of the higher profile players are betting and what some of their betting patterns may be. So you can use that and factor it into the equation and try and make more informed choices from it. But I think, anybody who's been doing this for a long time as a bettor or even a bookmaker, if you're not fascinated by what goes on the odds screen or the life cycle of a number, then it's probably not going to stick with you as long as possible. So I think every season you try and peel back the curtain and identify some of those patterns that are out there and hope that you can glean at least something from that, whether if it's a setup, whether it's a true position or a variety of other factors, before you're going to put your capital in play, because we know the strongest opinion any bettor can have is, with their bankrolls. And if you're not willing to put your skin in the game and take a position, I can have opinions on everything under the sun. But if I'm not invested in a particular side or total, my opinion doesn't mean nearly as much.
You touched on something I've been bringing up. I'm fascinated with the number of very talented handicappers that I've run across, knowledgeable people that literally have no clue and don't care about the market. I mean, yeah, they know to look at the screen at that one moment in time and take the best line, but they're completely oblivious to why a line is moving, when a line is going to move, the reasons for it, who moved it, why it's moving, and what times of the week it's going to move or the day. And it just fascinates me that so many smart people don't value that as much. How much did you value that in what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important skill set to have. And being someone who kind of operates a little bit in a vacuum, doesn't originate a ton, I always have to be cognizant of what's going on. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm glued to my screen from sunrise to sunset every single day, but you do want to kind of keep tabs on what's going on, where a number opened, why it may be moving. But I think to your point, Chris, and of course, this is, as much hypothesis as anything else, as you get more people that come from the Wall Street side of things that aren't doing things the old school way, and I know that carries a little bit of a negative connotation, that are betting off math models, I don't think they're always as price sensitive. I think as soon as that number is out there for them, they don't care where the number goes. If their model says a total should be 41.5 in an NFL game, and the market's at 43.5. They don't care if it's Tuesday at 6 a.m. Eastern time. They don't care if it happens Friday night at 11 o'clock Pacific time. They're going to go out there and try and gobble up as much as possible. And I think for a lot of us, it's frustrating because you go, you know what? If these guys would have waited, we all like the game under the total. We could have had 44 on this game, or who knows where the public would have driven it. And it drives you nuts because years ago, you used to be able to forecast how all that stuff was going to happen. And now every season, I think, especially early on, it becomes a guessing game and an endless source of frustration where you sit there and almost want to reach through your computer and strangle someone going, what are you doing going now? The public is coming in on this game hand over fist. Don't take 6.5 in a game that we're easily going to be able to get 7 if you're patient and wait it out.
Drives me nuts. It happened each of the last 2 years. It's a lot to do with this Euro betting group. I know that. And just other people betting at the wrong times. They could have gotten key numbers or an extra half point. Go ahead, Ron.
I want to follow up with that. I think sometimes I put in partial bets on numbers just because I don't want to lose that number.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a strategy that's good or bad, but I like to get at least something in on a number that I think is good.
Yeah, no, and I think that makes a ton of sense. And that was kind of something that I ascribed to maybe a little bit more over the last couple of years during COVID. If a number in, say, college football I thought was off, I didn't want to take a full position early in the week for the fear that, hey, look, 13 key contributors could be ruled out before kickoff on Saturday. But I at least want to have something down on that particular game. And while COVID luck is what it is, I mean, there was a game that we gave out on the Bet the Board podcast. When we went on Thursday, we gave out the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday Night Football against the Green Bay Packers. I think we gave them out. Yeah, I think we gave them out +7. Game goes to +6.5. I wake up Friday morning and the first alert I get on my phone is that Kirk Cousins has COVID. I go, well, at least I know I can get ahead of my prep for next weekend because I don't need to watch a single down on Sunday Night Football because this game has no chance. And then inevitably you get folks, well, should we buy off? And I go, you're not buying off laying 14 on a game where you took 7 on the chance that it's going to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So my process did change a little bit. Let's hope that COVID doesn't play a role in some of the games, but Lord only knows what the hell is happening with some of these situations. And at least for the Arizona Cardinals, hopefully Kyler Murray having COVID in camp gets the head out of the way for them before the season starts.
I've had a lot of friends that are sports bettors because they made some of the common mistakes that I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen, on both ends of the spectrum, where they're chasing games, the games on Monday, the games on TV, and all those other things. Are there any other common mistakes you've seen bettors make other than the traditional money management ones and those kinds of things that might be a warning sign out there?
I mean, I think it's just as much harnessing your emotions. And it's easier said than done for any of us that have been in this game for a while. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't make bad bets from time to time or I was influenced in the spur of the moment. Now, the one thing that I'd like to think I do smarter now than I would have done, say, 10, 12 years ago, it's a significantly smaller position. So it's not going to have long-lasting negative ramifications for anything I'm doing. Money management, I think, Ron, like you said, is the key. As unsexy a topic as it is for people, figure out what your bankroll is, set it aside. But when you talk to them about Kelly criterion and betting 2.5 to 5%, for someone that has $1,000 that they're starting the season with, they don't want to hear that the biggest bet they should be making is $50 when they feel they have a max edge. And I use the term edge a little bit loosely there because they don't know. But the reality of it is the longer you're in the game, more importantly, the more you can learn from, some of the mistakes. And I always go back to, the Mel Gibson movie Maverick, where he sits down at the poker table and goes, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to lose for the first hour or 2 hours. And I'll butcher the quote. And, the first time you watch, you go, what the hell are you doing? But I think that's so true for sports betting. You have to be willing to lose early on, as counterintuitive as this sounds, to be willing to win big later. Because it's better to make mistakes for smaller denominations than to make them when you're starting to bet substantially more.
I'd like to mention that, and I've mentioned this before in previous years, and this is a true fact from one of the biggest shops offshore. He said that 35 to 40% of the people that have funded their accounts at the beginning of September are completely empty by the first week of October. And that's something to remember. And that touches on what you said about bet sizing. You should only be betting 1.5 to 2.5% of what your bankroll is. And I know that's, not fun, and you may not hit the big time, but it's just something you have to remember. I want to ask you, do you see more sharps kind of getting squeezed a little bit and their edges are kind of going on, but they have opportunities to either move into the pick selling space or into the media space? Do you think that the sharps are going to get kind of squeezed kind of like that, where they have to pick alternative ways to get down by selling picks or being compensated by media?
I mean, I think the space has evolved some. I'll be honest, I drew a ton of criticism and scrutiny when I first went from behind the counter as a bookmaker and started to do more and more media. Granted, my bet sizing has increased over the years as I've had more financial means, but people would constantly come at me and go, well, if you have this edge or this perceived edge, why are you talking about it in media? Why are you sharing this and making this widely available? And my thought process at that time was, well, if I'm already doing the homework and I've already bet the particular games, I'm not sharing everything in the process. I'm giving a little bit of a glimpse here. And I'm trying to indicate exactly, where I'm betting and why. And over time, you've seen some of the sharper bettors and guys that I truly respect in the space doing a lot of that as well. Because I think if you're doing the work once, there's no reason not to try and be smart, be strategic, and figure out how you can get paid by multiple avenues to try and do it. And you guys have been around this. You guys have put together this video series. We could sit here and hand out one winner a week on this show every single week, and people would still come back to us 52 weeks from now and have no money to show for it and, be dug into the hole, because it's not sexy stringing together singles like you talked about, Chris. Everyone wants to go out there, swing for the fences. They want to land their 12 to 14 game parlay. These sports books aren't in business because they're utilizing a 4.5% edge on every football game at 11 to 10. There are a lot of high hold products out there. There are the things that they're marketing. And I think sharp bettors, as they continue to get squeezed and the edges may diminish some, they're evolving. They're figuring out unique ways to try and be able to get down. But they also realize that there's an increased appetite in media to try and get their information out there. And if they've already bet, they're not necessarily losing their edge because they're not revealing their entire process.
I think that's a segue to a question I have for you. Something that's near and dear to me is, for all the years I've been handicapping, I know what my strengths are, where I'm good at picking underdogs or favorites or this conference or that conference. I've charted it all out year after year, regardless of coaching changes and so on. Do you have that as well? Do you know what areas you're best in, for example, in football, or what areas that you just, for whatever reason, haven't gotten over the hump?
Yeah, I do. And I don't have it segmented out nearly as much as I probably should based on individual price ranges or, games, say I bet on Monday versus games that I'm betting later in the week. But as far as individual sports, I have more than a 10-year history that I put together. And I look at some of my numbers way back in, 2012-ish that were smaller amounts, and trying and identify, when I look at my bet, I look at my ROI, and realize, okay, there's a reason that you're consistently doing better in certain sports. And it may be some of the individuals I'm working with. It may be the quality of information that's widely available. And every season, when I go through the dog days of summer, usually in July, I try and build out what I would call my fiscal year and go, okay, here's what my edge is in a lot of these sports. Here's how I'm going to structure my bankroll and why my positions may be substantially larger in X, Y, and Z sport versus some of the others that are there. The one thing I will say in that regard, and I'm not going to sit here and promote any of the third-party services that are out there, but I do think there are good tools for new bettors who don't want to build out their own Excel sheets. They don't want to toil around in Access, that if they trust a third party to be able to log their data, that they can go out there, they can get a lot of the information and have access to some of the tools that we've all probably built internally to know exactly what we're doing from an accounting and record-keeping standpoint. And I really would encourage people to use it. But I think the real hard part that comes in there, it provides a sobering reality. The brain is a powerful tool. We can convince ourselves we're the world's best NFL bettor, but until you're logging every single one of your bets and you're being transparent and honest with yourself, you have no idea if you're winning or you're actually losing because you're lying to yourself to stay in business.
Yeah, one of the most the trickiest things about sports betting is how the mind tricks you into I left this game on the table, I would have won. And, those mind games of everything that you leave on the table. And the simple answer is it's better to leave a winner on the table than add a loser. What I'd like to ask, out of the box, out of the mainstream, a few unique process suggestions or lessons that you've learned along the way that may already be well known but surprised you at the time, or just something off the beaten path.
I think, one of the things that Ron touched on a little bit earlier, there are only so many hours in the day. And, all of us want to try and handicap every sport. We want to have action, January 1st, the same way we do on July 15th, the same way we do in the middle of October. But I think rather than being a jack of all trades and a master of none, figure out a level of specialization that you want to go into, whether it's a sport you're truly passionate about, or maybe an inefficient market that you can develop a passion for. And for me, to be honest, that was kind of NASCAR. I didn't watch a single NASCAR race growing up. I never watched them before I moved to Las Vegas. And the running joke is now with my mom, she goes, I don't know what happened to my son. He listens to country music. He watches NASCAR. I had no idea I was raising a redneck Jewish son in my household to try and go about it. But through that vehicle, I identified an opportunity. I think my passion came through for that particular sport. And it afforded me some opportunities to talk about it in media with some of the work I'd done for RaceHub. And now, obviously, using the Bet the Board brand and the strength of that to do a gambling podcast weekly in conjunction with NASCAR. So I think that would be part of it. And one of the things that, one of the sharpest options traders that I talked to, one of my buddies from college, that gets reiterated over and over again, he always tells me, buy the rumor, sell the news. If something is out there in the mainstream media and everybody is talking about it, the markets are efficient. That's going to be built into it. But if you think there's rumblings and people are perceiving it more as a rumor, well, normally there's a little bit of truth to it. And that's where you can probably identify an edge, especially in some of those secondary sports that are out there, more so than waiting for something to be made public. When a starting quarterback is out, a starting cornerback, hey, look, unless you had that information first, it's already built into the number, unless you can truly quantify an edge or you happen to have a player model that's far and away exceeds what the bookmakers have access to.
And, preseason NFL football is the perfect example of you got to have the information. And I can't be glued to the information because I'm busy doing other things. But as far as information versus metrics, how do you weigh those two together as a whole?
It's a combination. I think everybody, when you're looking at your process, and some are accelerated more than others, sports that are going on a daily basis, you don't have a chance to dig into every storyline every day. The unfortunate reality of it is there are going to be some situations where a player is going to get scratched or you're not going to know what's going on. In my opinion, for football, for the majority of folks that do this, there's very little reason to have an excuse for player availability. Granted, things will pop up on Sunday morning that you may not have seen, but if you're following the life cycle of a number and you know what the work week looks like from a practice standpoint and everything else, I think the best bets that you're going to find are a combination of things where you can check the box that the metrics suggest you have an edge, that the betting market suggests that you have an edge, that your information suggests that you have an edge. And in some cases, the intangibles that are out there that I do think have to play a role that you can't always quantify, for a sandwich spot, a team playing its third road game in 3 weeks, that, yeah, you may not be able to say empirically, hey, this is worth 2 points. No, you know what? I'm close on a game, but that's the thing that I'm going to lean on to put me over the finish line, to allow me to have something that I don't think bookmakers can quantify either and necessarily build into the market.
Yeah,
Ron?
I like that. I think I'll just throw this in just for a diversion. Where are you on Jacoby Brissett? Because I think I have an unpopular opinion that says having Jacoby Brissett for games 1 to 6 is better than having a rusty Deshaun Watson for games 1 to 6.
So I don't know if I'll go games 1 to 6, but I think out of the gates, it can definitely be a benefit when you look at how soft Cleveland's schedule is. This is a team that we've seen in the past. Kevin Stefanski doesn't disguise anything he wants to do. Their mentality is run first, lean on that talented offensive line, get Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb their touches, and then take advantage of a defense that, in my opinion, if they stay healthy, is probably a little bit underrated coming into the season. you dig into what Cleveland has as far as offensive weapons on the outside. There's no doubt they're going to need receivers to emerge. So I think Jacoby Brissett out of the gates is better. But if you're talking about Deshaun Watson working off the rust, I'd probably rather have, or I shouldn't say probably, I definitely would rather have Deshaun Watson games 4 through 6 once he'd been able to see live bullets than I would the first couple. But I do think, depending on how the suspension and the appeal gets sorted out, that it's going to be fascinating to see what books elect to do when Watson is back under center, whether it's game 7 or game 13. Because as all of us know, you can't make a full adjustment for Watson, knowing that he won't have been out there seeing live speed in an NFL game for, a season and a half, essentially.
You think it matters whether that first game is on the road or at home? Kind of an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain extent, a quarterback probably benefits, even one as established as Watson playing on the road, because you don't feel you have to win over the home crowd. They're not going to be on the edge of their seat. And we know Cleveland fans, much maligned in the grand scheme of things. I mean, they'll look to boo a franchise quarterback if he throws 3 incompletions and he comes out there, that some of the naysayers will be there. So I actually think it could benefit him being on the road. You can be a little bit more vanilla in your game plan and try and set up some of those easy throws to ease him into action, like you would with any quarterback that missed an extended amount of time.
You've been extremely generous with your time, so I'd like to just kind of throw in some quick hitters that might just be unusual. The first 4 are: what is the worst thing that you regret doing as a bettor, and what was the best thing that you remember doing as a bettor, and what do you like most about betting, and what do you like the least about betting?
So the worst thing that I've ever done as a bettor was placing the largest bet at the time of my life, being in a stadium where I had no cell phone access. So when there was an injury that went down late in the second quarter, I was not able to get off my side, and I had to watch the carnage of the Alamo Bowl, a story I've told a number of times, unfold before my very eyes. And Payne will bring it up at any chance we're given the opportunity, because he tells me I shouldn't go against the family. I took a position on that game against a lot of the guys that I talked to and truly respect. I was high as a kite when they had a 4-touchdown lead. I could not have been more than 3 inches tall after they squandered that away in overtime. So that was probably the worst decision I ever made. The best one was understanding how betting markets worked when I was in college, when I spent my semester in Australia. At the time, they had state-sponsored, I think they still do, I haven't been down there in quite some time, state-sponsored, essentially off-track betting called the TAB. And so what the TAB was what we've all grown accustomed to, a little bit grimy. You can find them in different spots, but they didn't offer just bets on horse racing. Any sport that took place in Australia, they had numbers available as well. So what I would do is I would monitor some of the sharpest offshore books, whether it was Bookmaker, whether it was Pinnacle, and I would watch the steam for the National Rugby League hit those markets first. I would walk down a couple of blocks from my apartment at the time, down to the TAB. I would bet the stale lines. I would get my free drink tickets, and I would feel like an absolute hero trying to bet into markets that I knew nothing about, couldn't name a single player, couldn't name a team, couldn't tell you where they were located in Australia, let alone the rules of the sport, just using some of the market context that was out there to try and be able to maximize it. As far as what I like most about the betting, I think it's the challenge. It's the ongoing cat and mouse game and the ability to test your wits against some of the most efficient markets out there, evolving over time, realizing as soon as you think you have this beat that you get smacked by the gambling gods and you're right back at square one to try and build it all back. So I think that challenge, as much as anything else, is what I truly enjoy. What I don't like, honestly, it's the level of commitment that you have to have to this craft if you're going to be successful. Having to give up a lot of events with friends or family and essentially becoming a stranger in my own house for 6 months of the year. And, I thank my fiance, soon-to-be wife, for understanding the demands that come with that. A lot of my family, because the unfortunate reality is I've lost friends when I couldn't go to bachelor parties, I couldn't go to weddings because I was so committed to being successful in an industry that's given me opportunities I never would have dreamed of. So I think that probably, is the thing that I dislike the most about the space.
Excellent answer. Ron does a hell of a lot of work, but he finds a way to get in his vacations and his dinners and stuff. What's your secret that we don't have?
Yeah. Chris is like 24/7 would be like cheating him of the hours that he spends on this thing. And I think at some point he has to come up for air, have that, make a schedule out and see if you could go to it. Who played in that Alamo Bowl, by the way?
That was TCU and Oregon, and it was a game where Vernon Adams got hurt late in the second quarter in a game that Oregon was dominating. TCU had Trevon Boykin was their star quarterback that year, who had been suspended for an altercation down in the Riverwalk. So got 7 points, the best of the number, before that information got made public. And it was a friendly reminder that no matter how perfect your intel is, you still need the game to go your way. But Ron, you mentioned schedule, and I know we talked about it at the top of the show. That's one thing for me. Friday nights have kind of become that blackout period where, to protect my relationship, I have to carve out 3 to 4 hours where we at least try and do dinner during football season, maybe take in a movie. And God bless Apple for putting the silent function on the phone, because I can put it there so it doesn't just vibrate in my phone nonstop and leave me with FOMO wondering what I'm going to miss, praying that the entire college and NFL boards don't light up from about 6 o'clock at night till 10 o'clock Pacific.
Well, this is a valuable lesson to teach people that when you have the opportunity to be nice to them, you buy them lunch, because that's probably the only reason Todd came on the show today, is because he owed me a lunch. But when we were BlackBerry buddies together and you switch, I still have my BlackBerry.
I didn't even know, Chris, those things were serviced. So you might be the last one. And, ultimately you can take that. The Smithsonian's going to contact you, and it's going to be a relic from their technology department that hopefully you're compensated handsomely for, maybe upwards of, $7 million, like the Honus Wagner baseball card that sold earlier.
Oh my goodness.
If you had a magic wand, what is the one thing that you would change in the sports betting space?
Wow. That's a tough question, but I think it would be, limits would be required to be publicly posted, across all books. And I say that because every book has a place in the ecosystem. We've seen it offshore, and I think we're seeing a little bit of that in the sports betting space. I could care less if books don't want to take action from sharp bettors, but come out and say that, be transparent about it, and don't masquerade or pretend to be something that you're not. In my opinion, you shouldn't have the ability to come on social media and pound your chest about taking a 7-figure bet on a game if you're not going to take that 7-figure bet from every single player that wants to play in your particular shop. And so for me, just own up to who you are. We all have places. There's a reason that recreational books can have a higher hold and still be extremely profitable, the same way that books can take larger limits, operate with lower margins. I mean, a Caesar's Palace always had a place in the table games ecosystem for what we did at Harrah's Entertainment, the same way Imperial Palace did. But I can tell you one thing, gentlemen, when I looked at those gaming reports at the end of each month, the hold was a hell of a lot higher on blackjack tables at Imperial Palace than it was at Caesars. But at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure you guys knew which property was a lot more important for our bottom line.
Ron, any final questions?
I think I know the answer, but my final question was going to be, do you ever envision yourself going back behind the counter?
You know what? I would say yes, but it would have to come with some caveats. And because do I think it happens in the near future? Probably not. But I do miss some of the energy, the intrigue, the gamesmanship from that side of the counter that you don't always get on this side. I actually enjoyed some of the larger sweats, even though they weren't going to come down on my shoulders for the decisions that were there when you felt like, hey, look, I moved the number the right way. My opinion was profitable in that particular regard. But I think it would have to come with the understanding that if I was going to work for some of the bigger operators that were out there, that they would give me the budget to hire the right people to book games that I wanted, to be able to book games, that we could have some of the more difficult discussions and not feel like we were ever withholding information from some of our players, not to the point where you're giving away all of the financials or proprietary information, but that we could feel trusted as a resource in the space, that when we gave out information, and not necessarily picks by any stretch of the imagination, but you could just make sports bettors feel more comfortable, create that camaraderie, create that rapport. The same way, to a certain extent, that if you walk around any casino floor, at least in Vegas, and I can't speak for other jurisdictions, the casino doesn't hesitate to spend 15 to 30 minutes teaching players how to roll dice so they feel more comfortable. They understand how that works. We all know that for most people, the power of 11 to 10 is going to erode their bankroll over time, unfortunately. At least give them a puncher's chance, allow them to enjoy the activity. Don't introduce games that are essentially sports betting equivalent of Keno and think you're putting up a fair fight.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to ask when the endless loss of value was ever going to occur, and teasers used to be minus 100, and now you see them at minus 140, and the average person just doesn't understand the huge difference in value that is lost there, and very hard to overcome these sort of things. But I think your answer would be the same as mine: as long as they can get away with it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, hey, look, there's something that I did when I was in analytics working for Caesars, and I can't remember if I've told this story, Chris, when we had lunch, but I'll reiterate it now. I mean, we were tasked with trying to figure out how we could maximize revenue on the casino floor. And it wasn't something that you took all that lightly, but you ran tests for all the things that were there. And I joke now that one of my lasting legacies, I think, unfortunately, is that I can be tied to the influx of 6-5 blackjack at a lot of the Caesars tables that were out there. And the reason we did that is because we found, to your point, customers weren't price sensitive. Right. We went out there and we had 3-2 blackjack tables available that gave you some of the best mathematical edges that you were going to find anywhere other than high limit. And people didn't care. They felt much more comfortable betting $10 at a 6-5 blackjack table than they did raising their average bet, actually having a fair fight where at least the math created a little bit. So as a business owner, we had to try and figure out ways that we could maximize our edge with a full casino floor. And that's what we found. It's something that a lot of the old school guys were reluctant to introduce. We went through various tests and we tried to figure things out. And we used to use Bally's as the experiment, as a, lower level property, not something that we were going to roll out at Caesars, but to go, if we put a 3-2 table next to a 6-5 table, but at the 6-5 table, I call it a party pit. I hand out stuffed animals, I hand out gimmicks, I hand out beads, and we can offer lower limits. What we found time and time again is that 6-5 table far outperformed a 3-2 table because the player wasn't looking for that. And I think that's what you're seeing, to kind of bring the story full circle a lot of times in the sports betting space right now.
I've seen that quite often with video poker, table games, sports betting lines. There's a huge amount of people that are just not that price sensitive. And you know what? It's everybody's money and everybody should have fun in the sports betting space, and nobody should be ridiculed or lectured at what they want to do. These videos are here to give people the knowledge and consideration of what they can do and what options are there for them. And by no means do you have to follow all this stuff because it's not fun. We know it's not fun, but I get a lot of feedback that people get value just knowing, that they can apply something that they've learned from one of the great guests that we've had and many other people in the gambling space. And that feels good because that's okay. It's their money.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. I mean, on one hand, you can say it's a shame to let a sucker keep, his or her money. On the other hand, you want people to at least have the tools. But I think all of us have buddies out there that we try and talk to that don't do it seriously, that'll look you in the face and go, you know what? I don't care about your practice. I don't care about the technique. All you're doing by telling me this is taking the fun out of the activity. Yeah. And to your point, hey, look, I'm a shit golfer. I don't spend a lot of time on the course. Sometimes I don't want to take pointers. So I understand why, sports bettors out there, especially some of the new wave folks that are there. But at the same time, I think what you guys are providing and what we try and do at Bet the Board as well is at least give people who want to learn more about the craft an ability to have that information at their disposal and choose to do with that information what they deem best.
So, Ron, any final thoughts?
Yeah. So, Todd, first of all, thank you so much for the time. I think anybody who's watching this will understand not only what it takes to be successful, but also to be even keeled. I can tell just from this last hour how even keeled you are, how you have to be that way when you're in this kind of field in terms of not overreacting and all those things. And I think people can tell that, and people can take whether or not they want to go this route or not. But I also want to stress that it doesn't necessarily have to be considered a grind or a bad grind to do this. I like working in July and August and uncovering something. I'm writing something and I say, wait a second, I see value that maybe some others don't see. And I suspect that when you go through your videos and when you do that on your podcasts, that you're doing the same thing. You've uncovered something, and what a great feeling that is. So I thank you for doing that and to sharing the hour plus with us now.
Oh, hey, my pleasure, guys. Thank you for inviting me on. And I do think, if I sounded a little bit cynical in certain capacities, that you do really have to love and embrace the process, because if you dread it every single day, this isn't a life that anybody should want to try and go into. So there are some challenges. There are plenty of days when you have a losing day or a losing week when you go, you know what, maybe I should have joined the Peace Corps. Maybe I should have done something a little bit different with my time. But there's no greater validation than when you see that board and everything materializes exactly the way you drew it up. And I think that's what you guys are trying to do through this medium, and a lot of what we try and do on the podcast. And if we don't reveal every single edge, people can understand why. You have to peel back the curtain some, but you can't peel it back all the way and give up all of that opportunity that you have available in the betting market.
It's remarkable that people gamble because they want the money. But in my opinion, the greatest way you can succeed is to not think about the money. So it's an issue with that. I recommend that everybody checks out Bet the Board. And like I said at the beginning of the show, whether I agree or disagree with the picks, the information is invaluable and adds to the little whatever knowledge base I can bring with me. So thank you very much, Todd. Best of luck to you. I ordered chicken for the wedding. And
hey, you know what, guys? That was the most challenging thing that we've had to do, is try and figure out what weekend during the year that you could actually be able to make that work, to get people to arrive and everything to happen. So not exactly a massive window if you want to do an outdoor wedding and avoid peak season in this business. But again, like I said, I couldn't do this without the support system. And my fiance plays a massive role in my ability to continue to excel in sports betting. And so I have a world of thanks and appreciation for the patience that she shows me, especially after those losing weekends.
You're a lucky guy. There's very few women that are going to stick with people that have our work schedules, at least the way I do it. So.
That's 100% true. Thanks again, guys. Good luck this season.
Until the next show, thanks again, Todd, Ron. We'll see you again soon.